Hello, everyone, and welcome to this latest edition of MSBA's Open Session program. And the topic for this program is equity in Missouri's public schools. And joining us to discuss that topic is Janet Tilley. And Janet is Senior Director for Equity and Board Development for MSBA. Janet, thanks a lot for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, first of all, Janet, why is it important for school boards in Missouri to be concerned about this issue of equity?
Well, it really goes back to the core principle of being a school board member. When board members were elected, they were elected to be a fiduciary. And a fiduciary has the responsibility of loyalty and trust and of care of the children within their district. And that means all children. And so as a fiduciary, you have to know what are the needs of our kids and how do we address all of those needs.
Mm-hmm. And this issue of equity, Janet, has certainly come to the forefront in recent months, and there are lots of aspects to this issue of equity that we can talk about. But certainly, it's become more in the forefront here recently, related to the COVID-19 situation and the reopening of school buildings and virtual learning and all the various challenges that schools are facing right now. And we even have some situations now where we have parents who are forming learning pods, hiring tutors, and kudos to those parents for their commitment to providing education for their kids. But this whole situation really does raise additional issues related to equity, doesn't it?
It really does. And, obviously what is happening within our society as far as education is concerned, and also with discrimination and race and all of those kinds of things have brought to the forefront where there's some real gaps that we have in our school districts, whether you are a wealthy school district or, in a larger urban area, or you're a small rural school district. When you refer to what happened with COVID, it was very obvious where the gaps were as far as just accessibility for broadband to be able to even connect. Sometimes families were sharing one device if they were lucky, but yet you had 4 kids within the classroom. So it's a terrible thing to have to face, obviously, with this pandemic, but it has helped us to be more aware of the issues that we need to address globally and locally.
Mm-hmm. And specifically, Janet, you mentioned this issue of internet accessibility. That's especially an issue for some of our rural school districts, not just the accessibility of broadband itself, but the ability, the resources that families have to even pay for it. And undoubtedly, we're going to see virtual learning expand, not only during the current crisis, but in the long run. So that's a real issue in Missouri, isn't it?
It really is. And one thing that I think is surprising that I have learned in the last few months is that it's not just even in our rural areas where there's this lack of broadband. I have friends who live in even the St. Louis area and in different spots within even the city, the urban area, there is a lack of connectivity and broadband. And so, you have to have that. It's like electricity. You have to have it if you're in order to survive as far as being able to educate our children.
Mm-hmm. Janet, what about the issues of equity, especially related to race and our African American students and other minority students in our school districts, and addressing those issues of equitable educational opportunities, an equitable learning environment? That's an issue that our boards need to be aware of as well, isn't it?
We use the term, educational opportunities, which is absolutely critical, but it's also about access. So I can have the opportunity there, but can the child access that opportunity? And so it goes a little bit deeper. Equity is not a topic. It's a process. And it's a process that the district has to look at systemically of how are we meeting the needs of all of our children. And we know that in Missouri that we have a number of children in poverty. The majority of those children in poverty are Black children or Latinx children. You have to dig a little bit deeper and to start to look at what are the processes or the reasons why those are the children who are in poverty. And you can't ignore it. We have to acknowledge the fact that a lot of these children are facing these barriers because of systemic processes that were put in place by the adults around them. And so we have to then know what those barriers are and know how to navigate and provide the access that these kids need. For an example, I'll give you an example. You know, you could have these after school activities for kids back before there was a pandemic, and that's great. However, some of our children, especially our Black children, Hispanic children, or whatever, were not able to access those opportunities because they had to ride the bus home. And so, you know, as with many of our children, and so because there isn't the transportation provided to them, they weren't able to access those. So that's just a small, example of the myriad of things that are there. But there are how many of our Black children are in gifted programs? How many of our Black children are taking advanced courses? So there's some mindsets there that we've got to work on to change.
Mm-hmm. Janet, we at MSBA, we're not newcomers to this issue of equity. We've been talking about it for quite some time, but the issue, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, has become even more urgent in recent months. So tell us a little bit about MSBA's initiatives related to equity.
The work really began almost 5 years ago. And it really began in connection with Desi's work with Dr. Paul Katnick and his work in looking at, we were required by the federal government to provide kind of an equity report. And his focus was on the fact that in our poor communities and in our urban communities, that our neediest children were being taught by people who were less experienced. First year teachers, those kinds of things. And so the other thing that it pointed out is that our minority children had very few teachers who looked like them. And so that's where our work first began, is to start to make some of our board members aware of where those disparities were within their district. It has then grown, and it's not just in response to the deaths of George Floyd and others, but we know that is what's driving a lot of the interest at this point. And so we know that we need to step up our game here as an organization. So we're doing that, and we have a number of initiatives that are going to start this year and then continue to move forward, we hope, forever. This isn't a fly-by-night, let's do this, put a Band-Aid on it and move on.
Mm-hmm. Specifically, Janet, what can school boards do? School boards are policy-making bodies.
Right.
So is that part of this initiative, to examine policies?
It is. And while we have had some districts call us and say, do you have an equity policy? Can we have it? Because we want to adopt it. Our response has been the fact that you are not ready for an equity policy until you've done the hard work with equity. You have to define it within your own district. You have to examine it. And so one of the things that we ask or that we're providing as supports for our boards to be able to do this is that we have a long-term project going on in conjunction with MSBA, our national organization, and several of our other state school board organizations to develop a policy toolkit. What this toolkit will do is that it will give the boards and the districts the strategies that they need to examine their own policies through an equity lens. For example, what does our hiring policy look like? Is it at a point where it is allowing then for us to be able to bring in a more diverse kind of teaching force? What does our discipline policy look like? So it will help us to examine all of your current policies. But we're not leaving it there, because we know that we provide policies to our members. And so we at MSBA are going to be doing the same exact thing. in the policies that we have and in the policies that we develop, we're going to use that equity lens to evaluate them and to revise them. So that's one of our big projects that's going to happen going forward.
All right, Janet, and of course, we'll be rolling out a lot of these initiatives here in the coming weeks and months. So if school boards are interested in contacting MSBA about this issue of equity and moving forward on it, they can contact you about that, I guess. Is that right?
They can, and I do want to share a couple of other, if it's all right, some other things that we are doing more immediate to be able to kind of help our board members. One of them is that we have incorporated 2 standalone trainings, 3-hour trainings that are a part of our leadership development program. That is on, one of them is about what the school board can do to support equity. The other one is on implicit bias. I'm doing a series of 3 workshops with a local school district where they're really going to dig deep. We're going to use their own student data. We're going to look at where their kids are. And we're going to help to develop an equity lens for them to use in evaluating their processes. The other thing is that if you look at our MSBA monthly board bulletin, there will be an article every month on equity in there. And then beginning in October, after our annual conference, once per month, there will be a 1-hour kind of breakout session, training session related to a topic on equity that will be available to our board members as well. So we got a lot going on, and we're not bored. So
Right.
that's a good thing.
Very good. All right, Janet Tilley, lots of good resources available to our members on this really important issue of equity in Missouri's public schools. And thanks very much for joining us. We appreciate that. And we thank you for joining us on this latest edition of MSBA's Open Session.